to know if your man is crazy or not, just check out his relationship with his mother. Because he's like, hey, mom, you. If he's like that, then you're next.
A lot of people talk about stand-up comedy nowadays. There's a lot of great comedians who are absolutely splendid performers, but beyond that, there are a few select comedians who do stand-up comedy long enough and achieve a coveted level of mastery at the craft that allows them to transcend into superstardom and become incredibly famous. This brings us to
Chris Rock!
Chris Rock!
Chris Rock! Chris Rock!
Chris Rock.
Who is Chris Rock? Some people consider Chris Rock to be one of the greatest comedians of all time. Dave Chappelle actually considers Chris Rock to be the greatest comedian working today. If you're a casual fan of Chris Rock, you may only know him as the main black guy from Grown Ups or caretaker from The Longest Yard, but if you're a big fan of comedy, you would know that he's one of the most talented and hardworking people to ever pick up a microphone and tell jokes. What makes Chris Rock such an astonishingly funny comedian who is able to sell out arenas around the country consistently? What is it about Chris Rock that makes the people constantly want more and more from him? There's a reason that so many people watch all of his movies and buy tickets to his comedy shows anytime he's in their town. What exactly is that reason? By the end of this video, you will know exactly who Chris Rock is, where he came from, some of the amazing work he's done, and what makes his style of comedy so remarkable and extravagant. This is Chris Rock, the greatest living comedian. On February 7th, 1965, Christopher Julius Rock was born in a small town called Andrews, South Carolina. When he was born, his parents very soon after would move to the Crown Heights neighborhood, which was located in Brooklyn, New York. Then Chris and his family would spend a couple years here while adjusting to the harsh contrast of living in New York City as opposed to a small town in South Carolina. Then after some time went by, Chris's family decided to move once again. This time they would relocate to Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is a more working-class borough in Brooklyn, New York. Bedford-Stuy actually borders Crown Heights towards the north, so this move was not a very difficult one to manage for Chris and his family. Chris's parents were his mother Rosalie Rock, who was a teacher and social worker for special needs children, and his father Julius Rock, who was a truck driver and a newspaper delivery man. Chris was the oldest of 5 brothers and one sister growing up in his family. He had an older half-brother named Charles Liddell Rock, who was the son of his father Julius. Of his 5 brothers, his 3 younger brothers Anthony, Kenny, and Jordan are also in the entertainment industry. The most notable one being Tony Rock, who is best known for playing Uncle Ryan on Chris Rock's sitcom, Everybody Hates Chris. Chris Rock's family history is incredibly interesting and thorough, so much so that it actually received its own profile on the PBS series African American Lives 2. Chris took a DNA test and found out that he and his family are of Cameroonian descent, specifically from the Udeme people who reside in North Cameroon. Rock's great-great-grandfather Julius Caesar Tingman was enslaved for 21 years before serving in the American Civil War as part of the United States Colored Troops. Then during the 1940s, Chris Rock's paternal grandfather moved from South Carolina to New York City, where he would go on to work for many years as a preacher and taxi cab driver. It would seem that this type of move is well embedded in the Rock family, since his grandfather moved from South Carolina to New York, and then his family would follow this trend later when Chris was just a little boy. Chris Rock attended James Madison High School, which is a public school located in Midwood, Brooklyn. Growing up in Brooklyn, Chris was often on the receiving end of bullying and targeted harassment. Chris has talked many times about how he was bullied as a kid primarily because of the fact that he was black and also very physically small. Chris would be bused to school in predominantly white neighborhoods in Brooklyn, so he would often catch beatings from white students at his school. As he continued to grow older, the situation did not improve. The beatings and bullyings continued to get worse and worse until eventually his parents would pull him out of his high school, and instead of transferring to another school, Chris decided to drop out of school entirely. It's very sad to know that as a kid, Chris suffered so much physical abuse simply because he could not or would not defend himself. Chris actually did an interview with Howard Stern and tells an interesting story about the time he ran into one of his bullies from school. Check it out.
It was just a horrible existence. The closest character I can relate to is Tim Robbins in The Shawshank. Every day was hell. I was and I got fucking my beat, and I got physically fucked up. I was doing a movie a couple of years ago, and one of my bullies was working security on the movie.
Shit.
A guy who literally one day in school turned me upside down and shook the money out of my pockets. And I'm filming a scene, This is a top 5. And I look and I'm like, is that B? I'll just say B. And he nodded, kind of shame, he was kind of ashamed. And I just gave him just a quick look like, hey man, I hope you're doing well. You take care. And I kept it moving. I didn't like, get him off the set, get him fired. It's like his sin has punished him. He could have been my friend.
I'm sure as he grew up, he learned that he shouldn't tolerate abuse like that and how to properly respond to physical altercations.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Well, I guess some habits just never die. I'm just playing. Anyway, even after dropping out from high school, Chris would eventually go back and earn his GED. And then after this, he would start to pick up jobs at various different fast food restaurants to try and save some money as a young man. While he was growing up, Chris would take an interest in stand-up comedy and would start to watch it all the time when he was home from school or not working. Some of Chris's comedic influences include Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, Red Fox, George Carlin, and that hypocrite Bill Cosby. Then in 1984, Chris Rock would perform stand-up comedy for the very first time in New York City's Catch a Rising Star at 19 years old. He would then proceed to start performing at various different comedy clubs throughout New York City to establish himself, where he became known for his sharp wit and observational humor. These high-energy and thought-provoking performances quickly gained Chris a lot of attention, and he soon became a regular at these venues. Given his upbringing, Chris often delved into the realities of being a black man and tackling issues such as racism, relationships, and social inequality. Then eventually, after many years of hard work, Eddie Murphy would stumble across Chris Rock performing at a comedy club, and he would then befriend Chris and take him under his wing. This must have been absolutely amazing for Chris to have one of your comedy heroes and idols see you perform comedy and kill it, and then after the fact he tells you how well you did, and you end up becoming great friends with him. That's a dream come true for so many comedians, and Chris experienced that in his early 20s. Upon meeting Eddie Murphy, Chris would get his first film role and major break in 1987 for the movie Beverly Hills Cop 2. In this movie, Chris played a small role as a parking valet, and he has one scene with Eddie Murphy where he has a few funny lines that were pretty memorable. Watch this.
Yo, what the f*** is up, man? Check this out. I get $10 for cars. I get $20 for limos. What the hell is this?
My truck.
He didn't have that many lines, but he was pretty funny for the short appearance he had. In this time, Chris would continue to make leaps and bounds for his comedy career while developing his act and finding his own unique voice on stage. At this point, Chris was ready to take his career to the next level by making his stand-up television debut on Joan Rivers' late-night television show. This was an important moment in Chris's career, and he actually made this appearance in 1987, which is the same year that Joan Rivers' show would come to an end. In fact, Chris Rock was actually the very last comedian to perform on Joan Rivers' Late Show.
I was driving down the street, saw a prostitute, asked her how much. She said, $300, I'll do anything you want. I said, bitch, paint my house. And I live at home, and my mother likes to clean up my room. And whenever my mother cleans up my room, she always takes out all my dirty magazines. And whenever your mother takes your dirty magazines, you can't say anything about it. If she don't say nothing, you don't say nothing. And to play it off like they were never there in the first place.
Chris would absolutely kill it on her show, and this would also lead to Chris receiving even more opportunities to work in the biggest comedy clubs all throughout New York City. With all this progress as a comedian and being in his first movie, he would then receive the opportunity to appear in the movie I'm Gonna Get You, Sucka, which was a blaxploitation film directed by Keenan Ivory Wayans that featured many different black actors such as John Witherspoon, Damon Wayans, and many more. Chris Rock had another minor role in this movie as a goofy customer asking for ribs. If you've seen this movie, you will definitely remember the scene where Chris asks for ribs. It's a pretty goofy scene.
How much for an order of ribs?
$2.50.
$2.50? Let me get one.
Right on. One order ribs.
No. One rib. Now, why don't you let me get a sip for 15 cents?
My cups cost more than 15 cents.
All right, the cup. Pour it in my hand for a dime.
Then after this movie, Chris would also land a role in the TV series Miami Vice, which was Chris Rock's first appearance on a TV show as an actor.
This computer bulletin board I belong to, we talk back and forth kind of like an electronic bull session. Fascinating technology.
Carson, shouldn't you be getting back to Central Files? They might miss you.
Yeah, maybe I should.
Despite all this career progression from Chris, tragedy would eventually strike in his life. Unfortunately for the Rock family, Chris's father Julius would die in 1988. This was just 4 years after Chris started his career as a stand-up comedian, and this surely affected Chris on a deep emotional level. However, after mourning the loss of his father, he would continue to work hard and hone his craft as a comedian, while also picking up film roles on the side. Then after more time went by, and Chris's comedic ability and arsenal continued to grow, he was recruited by Lorne Michaels at NBC to become a cast member for Saturday Night Live in 1990. The 90s were arguably the best years for Saturday Night Live, given the exuberant amount of talent that had just been added to the roster. Behind Chris Rock, Lorne Michaels had also hired Adam Sandler, David Spade, Chris Farley, and Rob Schneider. These guys would end up becoming the best of friends, and with that, they quickly built up a strong reputation on Saturday Night Live and received the title the Bad Boys of SNL. Given Chris and his cunning observational humor and sharp wit, he would become a standout cast member on Saturday Night Live very quickly. Some of Chris Rock's most memorable sketches and characters on SNL included Nat X, a parody of a militant talk show host, and I'm Chillin', a laid-back character who reacts to various situations with a nonchalant I'm chillin' type attitude. His performances on SNL helped solidify his reputation as a talented comedian and paved the way for his successful career in stand-up comedy and acting after the fact. During his time at Saturday Night Live, Chris would proceed to tape his first comedy album in 1991 titled Born Suspect. The album was recorded in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was a massive success. Before I move on, it's truly astonishing to me that Chris Rock was able to record his first comedy album only 7 years into his comedy career, and it was so well received that you would think he had been doing stand-up comedy for well over a decade. This just proves that Chris Rock was on another level when it came to performing stand-up comedy. After a well-received comedy album, Chris would pick up another film role in the movie New Jack City, where he played a crack addict named Benny Pookie Robinson in this movie, and he would then go on to receive critical acclaim for how well he nailed the role. This was actually a quite serious role Chris played too, and he absolutely killed it. I would show clips of it, but I don't want this video to get age restricted, so if you're curious about Chris Rock in this movie, you should just look it up for yourself. Throughout Chris's tenure on Saturday Night Live, he would continue to gain widespread notoriety and fame across the country because of his uncanny ability to be funny in sketches and on stage as a stand-up comedian. Chris had made plans to depart from Saturday Night Live after the 1992-93 season, but he was not invited back the following season anyway, which led to the understanding that he had effectively been fired from Saturday Night Live. Then later that year, he would be invited to appear in the sketch show titled In Living Color, which was a sketch show that consisted mainly of black cast members, and Chris would proceed to act in 6 episodes. Unfortunately for Chris, only a month after arrival, the sketch show would be canceled after his 6th appearance. After this, Chris would go on to write and star in the low-budget comedy movie titled CB4, released in 1993. The film would end up being a massive success by making approximately $18 million profit at the box office, with a budget of only $6 million to produce the film. Upon this movie being released, Chris would then join 3 Arts Entertainment, which is an American production and talent management company. It seems like getting kicked off Saturday Night Live just led to Chris Rock continuing to trend upwards towards his goal as a comedian, because in 1994, Chris would headline his first HBO comedy special half-hour titled Big Ass Jokes. According to Chris, he felt after this special, he had a significant rough patch in his career. He went on the record to say, quote, "I was a has-been, so I figured if I'm not going to be famous, I can at least get really good and get back to being the way I was before I met Eddie Murphy and saw the big houses and the girls," end quote. So he was determined to return to what he was before he started taking more movie roles and acting on Saturday Night Live, and he wanted this next comedy special to be an undeniable masterpiece. And it was nothing short of that. Chris would spend the next 2 years honing his act in New York City comedy clubs every single night, just searching for every pocket of air to tighten and find every possible angle he could to make the audience laugh endlessly. After taking his sweet time to build what he considered a masterful act of comedy, he would then launch a national tour across the country to continue to perform and find any crevice or space there could possibly be left for laughter. After this tour ended, things got very real June 1st, 1996, when Chris would finally release his first hour-long comedy special titled Bring the Pain, which was recorded at the Tacoma Theater in Washington, D.C. Before this special was released, Chris Rock was a very successful comedian because of his stand-up comedy, Saturday Night Live, and also some of the movie roles he had played in. Once Bring the Pain was released, this literally turned Chris Rock into one of the most popular and critically acclaimed comedians in the country. Of course, fans of stand-up loved this incredibly tight hour of comedy, but in addition to that, the critics and people happened to be in complete harmony when it came to this special. Bring the Pain is widely regarded to be one of the best comedy specials to ever be released. Entertainment Weekly called this special groundbreaking and considered it an instant classic. Then Variety magazine took it to the next level by comparing Chris Chris Rock to comedians like Richard Pryor and Lenny Bruce, and they also called it, quote, one of the truly remarkable hours of comedy to air on television, end quote. There was a part of the special that had everybody around the world talking, and it was certainly one of the most controversial bits Chris had ever written. The bit I'm talking about is, of course, nachos versus black people. Based on my euphemism, you can start to see why this bit is so controversial before you even watch it. Chris would do interviews about this bit often, and would constantly be asked questions about his stance on it. Chris did not expect this to be so massively controversial, and ultimately this led to him never performing the bit again. He did an interview with 60 Minutes, and he went on to say, quote, by the way, I've never done that joke again, ever, and I probably never will, because some people that were racist thought they had license to say Nigeria, so I'm done with that routine, end quote. It's pretty apparent why this bit led to so much controversy. However, apparently black and white sells, literally, because in 1997, Chris Rock would proceed to win 2 separate Emmy Awards for this comedy special, Outstanding Variety Music or Comedy Special, and Outstanding Writing for a Variety or Music Program. Then later in 1997, Chris would release a comedy album titled Roll with the New, and in this album he would combine material from Bring the Pain, the comedy special, with comedy sketches. It won the Grammy Award for Best Spoken Comedy Album. After all the publicity from the special, Chris Rock would start to be invited on shows to actually discuss issues such as Comedy Central's Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher during the 1996 presidential elections, and with this appearance he would actually receive yet another Emmy Award nomination. This was such a successful comedy special for Chris Rock that it seemed like opportunities were just lining up for him day and night. He would also end up returning to the set of Saturday Night Live after the release of this special to host for the first of 3 times that Chris would host Saturday Night Live. On a quick side note, Chris would also find himself getting married the same year to Malak Compton Rock on November 23rd, 1996. Then in 1997, Chris would be invited to host the MTV Music Video Awards, and he would graciously accept this opportunity. All in all, Chris Rock came a really long way from his early life. He started off as just a scrawny black kid from South Carolina who would get picked after the white kids in sports, but he would then find a deep love for stand-up comedy that would lead him to meeting one of his comedy heroes in his early 20s. Then at 31 years old, after grinding the brutal New York comedy circuit for over a decade, Chris released one of the greatest comedy specials to ever be recorded, and it completely changed his life by turning him into one of the most popular comedians in America. With all of this progress, Chris would then receive an amazing opportunity that would change his life and just continue him down the path that he was already on of comedic superstardom.
Throw your hands in the air if you's a true player.
After the massive success of Bring the Pain, HBO would approach Chris Rock about starting his own late-night talk show. This led to the inception of The Chris Rock Show, which was a weekly late-night talk show that would air every Friday at 6:30 p.m. in the Circle on the Square Theater on Broadway. The show combined stand-up comedy, sketches, and interviews to provide a unique and often satirical perspective on various social and cultural issues. The show was absolutely huge for Chris and really just helped accelerate his rise to comedic superstardom. The show gained critical acclaim for its bold and unapologetic approach to addressing race, politics, and contemporary issues. Chris Rock's sharp wit and insightful commentary made the show a standout in the late-night television landscape. The show also featured a very talented team of writers, including Louis C.K., Vernon Chatman, Wanda Sykes, and Daniel Dratch. The format of the show would often run as follows. Chris Rock typically opened each episode with a monologue, delivering stand-up comedy that often touched on current events, social issues, and pop culture. Next, the show featured a variety of comedy sketches, showcasing Chris Rock's talent for satire and ability to address complex issues through the lens of humor. The sketches often tackled taboo topics mentioned in that episode's opening monologue, like race, politics, or everyday life. Chris certainly hadn't lost his talent for being hilarious in sketches, given that he honed his comedic muscle for many years while on Saturday Night Live. Then Chris would sometimes go out into the field to interview people or interact with the public. This is incredibly similar to what Conan O'Brien considered field remotes, where the host of the show is out interacting with people in a field setting outside the show's studio. These segments often provided a humorous and unfiltered look at people's opinions on various subjects. Following the remotes, the show consistently included interviews with celebrity guests. These interviews were conducted in a casual and humorous manner, reflecting Chris Rock's unique interviewing style. The discussions could touch on serious topics, but Chris made sure that these interviews were always infused with comedy. Then, similar to many late-night shows, the show often featured musical performances by guest artists or bands. Some notable musical guests featured on The Chris Rock Show were Prince, Outkast, Busta Rhymes, Wynton Marsalis, and the Wu-Tang Clan. Chris's inclusion of diverse musical acts complemented the show's comedic and social commentary elements very well, creating a well-rounded entertainment experience for the audience. Finally, the show occasionally included special segments that became popular. The notable segments from the show included The Vortex of Sin, a satirical take on sensationalistic news programs, and How to Not Get Your Ass Kicked by the Police, which was a humorous and thought-provoking sketch offering advice on interacting with law enforcement. These segments were often memorable for their comedic take on serious issues. The Chris Rock Show was loved by comedy fans everywhere, and some of my favorite moments from the show were when Chris featured other legendary comedians. I'll share some of my favorite guests from the show. The first person that comes to mind as a guest on the show was Tracy Morgan. When he comes on the show, he and Chris talk about their times on Saturday Night Live, the similarities and differences between now and when Chris was on, and also we get to see Tracy Morgan play a Saturday Night Live character he calls the loud but wrong guy. Here's a clip of it.
So you're the new black guy on Saturday Night Live?
Yeah, the new black dude.
So then, you know, 'cause I was there for a while. I was there, and Eddie was there, and Damon was there. Here on the Chris Rock Show, we're gonna give you your own character.
Here's my point. Ketchup is mustard. They the same thing. It's just red fucking ketchup.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
What's ridiculous is how they con you into believing that ketchup ain't mustard. That's ridiculous.
I absolutely love this moment. Tracy Morgan is hilarious, and Chris brought him on and let him just show off his impressions. Another one of my favorite guests on the show is Conan O'Brien. We get to see Chris interview Conan very early in his career, when you can tell that Conan is still finding his voice as a late-night TV host. You can tell he's still testing the waters too, and he's a little more cutthroat than the average Conan O'Brien clip you'd watch on YouTube today. Seeing Chris Rock riff with the witty and cunning king of late-night television never gets old. Here's one of my favorite parts.
Dave, you got the best show by far. Oh, that's nice of you to say. No! You got the best show! In person, I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall. I'm incredibly sexy, and I have a very pleasing odor, and so it's funny. People have no idea that I'm that tall. They have no clue. Boy, I tell you, that Wu-Tang Clan is dope, aren't they? You know, that ODB has some brown teeth, you know, those teeth are so brown when he drinks water, it turns into iced tea.
I love this interview. Then finally, my favorite interview on the Chris Rock Show was George Carlin. George comes on, and he and Chris talk about stand-up comedy, and they get to the topic of language and how censorship is a load of crap. I think for the time it was a pretty great interview. Check it out.
It's a strange. You know why? You know why I have all that inconsistent stuff? Because it's all bull. It's all bull to start with. You know, they can talk about. You can talk about. You can say, you know, you're gonna. And I don't say. It's a family newspaper. How do you think the Family got started? F***ing. That's what it is.
All in all, these were a few of my favorite moments of the Chris Rock Show featuring guests. The show ran for 5 seasons from 1997 to 2000, but in its time on the air, it was highly acclaimed by viewers and critics alike, and this led to it winning an Emmy for Outstanding Writing for a Variety or Music Program in 1999. Nowadays, you can find the complete series of the Chris Rock Show on Tubi, where every episode ever recorded is available to watch. All in all, the Chris Rock Show only lasted 5 seasons, but in that time, it was an absolutely massive opportunity for Chris to continue to demonstrate his comedic ability to his newfound fans that he made after the release of one of the biggest comedy specials ever recorded, Bring the Pain. As mentioned previously, the show won an Emmy for writing, and his television work has won a total of 3 Emmy Awards and 15 nominations. The show was amazing for the time, and it only helped to propel Chris Rock's comedy career even further into the stratosphere. You got a gun up in your waist, please don't shoot up the place. Chris Rock was a big comedian after Bring the Pain, but he would very soon gain even more traction and fame as he continued to hone his craft. As more time went by and Chris continued to perform stand-up comedy and deepen his comedic arsenal, he would eventually work incredibly hard to release his third comedy special on July 10th, 1999, that would be titled Bigger and Blacker. Now, when I first read the title of the special, I thought for sure we were betting on a fight, because when it comes to sports betting with fights, I always put my money on the bigger, blacker guy.
Because usually I pick the bigger, blacker guy.
But see, this was a comedy special. Bigger and Blacker was recorded at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. This was yet another brilliant comedy special from Chris Rock, and upon its release it would go on to win the 2000 Grammy Award for Best Spoken Comedy Album. Then on April 17, 2004, Chris would release his fourth comedy special titled Never Scared, which was recorded at the Dar Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. Once again, this special was critically acclaimed, and comedy fans just could not believe that Chris Rock could continuously release bigger and better comedy specials every single time he decided to come out with one. Then Never Scared won the 2006 Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album. It seemed like everything was just going exactly as Chris Rock had intended for it to go. Entertainment Weekly would go on to release numerous articles where they praised Chris Rock's past few comedy specials, and they would proceed to call Chris the, quote, funniest man in America, end quote. By the end of the decade, Chris Rock was established as one of the preeminent stand-up comedians and comic minds of his generation. During this time, Chris Rock also translated his comedy into print form in the book Rock This, and then released the Grammy Award-winning comedy albums Roll with the New, Bigger and Blacker, and Never Scared. Then on September 27, 2008, Chris Rock would release his fifth comedy special titled Chris Rock, Kill the Messenger, which was edited together from 3 performances. One at the Carnival City Casino in Johannesburg, one at the HMV Hammersmith Apollo in London, and one at the Apollo Theater in New York City. This was just another special that would go on to cement Chris Rock as one of the greatest comedians to ever walk the planet. Upon release, comedy fans and critics alike would claim this as yet another amazing special from Chris, which led to it winning 2 Emmy Awards, including one for Outstanding Writing for a Variety Music or Comedy Special. With all of the success of the last few comedy specials Chris had released, he started to pick up more movie roles, but he would start to be offered much bigger roles for these movies where he played main characters rather than just side roles. He would then star in the dark comedy Nurse Betty in 2000, starring Renee Zellweger, Greg Kinnear, and Morgan Freeman, which also debuted at the Cannes Film Festival on May 11, 2000. This film was critically acclaimed by critics and film fans alike and would yield a near $5 million profit at the box office. Then in the later 2000s, Chris Rock, similar to Louis C.K., started to find himself increasingly more behind the camera, playing the role of director. He actually co-wrote the film Down to Earth in 2001 with Louis C.K., and then later was cast by Louis to play the main character in the movie Pootie Tang. Pootie Tang was legendary for being a movie that was ruthlessly mocked by critics, but after all the hate, it would then become a cult classic amongst movie fans. Chris would also work as a writer and director of the political comedy Head of State in 2003 and marital comedy I Think I Love My Wife in 2007. Back in 2002, Chris was cast as a lead in the action comedy film Bad Company with Anthony Hopkins. Then in 2005, Chris Rock was a lead actor in one of my favorite movies of all time, titled The Longest Yard. This was an Adam Sandler movie that featured a legendary cast with people like Burt Reynolds, Nelly, Tracy Morgan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and so many more I cannot name them all. In this movie, Chris Rock plays the character Caretaker, who rather than plays football, coaches because according to him...
You play football?
Me? No. I suck so bad they used to pick me after the white kids. You should be mad too. It's like, I can't believe I picked a nigga that can't play.
Perhaps there's some truth in that joke Chris is trying to share with us. This is a movie that impacted me personally a lot though, because my dad and I find ourselves quoting it to each other often. One of my favorite moments from The Longest Yard is when one of the characters gets tackled and he starts to imagine things, and Chris Rock's character looks him dead in the face and says this classic line.
I got Burr. His name's Ronnie.
Well, tell Ronnie you got knocked the fuck out.
What an iconic line from an iconic comedian and actor. After playing caretaker in The Longest Yard, though, later in the year Chris Rock would receive another amazing opportunity for himself. Fox had pitched a sitcom about the childhood of Chris Rock that would be entitled Everybody Hates Chris, but Fox would not air it. However, when the United Paramount Network received the rights for the show, ultimately it was given the green light and greeted positively, so they turned it into a series. It premiered in September 2005, and Chris Rock himself did not appear in the show, but he was an intermittent narrator for the show. Chris and Ali Leroy were the executive producers for the show, and behind them was a very talented staff of writers who helped make the show as funny as possible. As mentioned earlier, the show was a family sitcom patterned on Chris Rock's recollection of his teenage years growing up in the 1980s with a wholesome, tight-knit black family, while living in drug and gang-infested Bedford-Stuyvesant, New York, and also attending a crosstown all-white public high school. A young Chris Rock is played by Tyler James Williams, and he was meant to represent how as a kid, Chris was a nerdy and scrawny teenager that would get lampooned by everybody he went to school with, specifically white kids. Then Chris's working-class father Julius was played by Terry Crews, with Tichina Arnold playing his confrontational mother in the show. The show was incredibly successful for several different reasons. First of all, the show was incredibly funny. The show's humor was a major draw because it skillfully blended Chris Rock's distinctive comedic style with traditional sitcom humor. The witty writing and clever observations about family, adolescence, and race resonated with many audiences everywhere. Secondly, it was the concept of the relatability. A lot of people have been bullied in high school. In fact, for most people it hasn't always been a smooth ride going to school. The series depicted the challenges of adolescence, family dynamics, and navigating high school for a young man. Many viewers found the show incredibly relatable, especially those who experienced similar coming-of-age struggles. The universal themes of growing up, facing peer pressure, and dealing with strict parents struck a chord with a diverse audience across the country. The show also provided thoughtful dialogue and social commentary, specifically a unique perspective on race and culture, tackling issues such as racial dynamics, racial stereotypes, and socioeconomic struggles. The show used humor to shed light on these topics, making it both entertaining and thought-provoking. All these factors and more led to this show becoming an instant classic for comedy fans all over the world. The show garnered both critical and rating success. Overall, the combination of humor, relatability, cultural commentary, and strong performances from the cast made Everybody Hates Chris a beloved and enduring series. It continues to be appreciated by audience for its timeless themes and entertaining portrayal of the challenges of adolescence. The series was nominated for a 2006 Golden Globe for Best TV Series, Musical or Comedy, a 2006 People's Choice Award for Favorite New Television Comedy, and 2 2006 Primetime Emmy Awards for Costuming and Cinematography. Eventually, the Universal Paramount Network that aired the show would merge with the Warner Bros. Television Network to form the CW Television Network, and when this happened, the show would proceed to air its final 3 seasons. Then in 2009, despite the show's massive success amongst critics and ratings, Chris had announced that the events that had taken place in the show concluded right around the same time he himself had dropped out of school. This meant that given the show's runtime, he felt that his story had been adequately told and that he was ready for the show to conclude so he could proceed to work on other projects. After the show ended, Chris Rock would continue to perform stand-up comedy and hone his act for future comedy special, while also taking other roles in movies he received. Starting in 2005, Chris had also voiced the eccentric zebra, Marty, in DreamWorks' animated film franchise Madagascar. He starred in 2 of the film's sequels, Madagascar Escape to Africa in 2008 and Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted in 2013. Also in 2007, Chris Rock voiced Mooseblood the mosquito in the Jerry Seinfeld animated film The Bee Movie. Chris Rock would then go on to shock the world by making his first ever documentary titled Good Hair in 2009. This documentary talks about the history of how black women have styled their hair and their own perception of what it should be like. The film explored the current styling industry for black women, images of what is considered acceptable and desirable for black women's hair in the United States, and their relation to African American culture. The documentary had nothing to do with comedy, but it still came incredibly naturally for Chris, and the film would go on to be unanimously praised by critics. The film premiered at the 2009 Sundance Film Festival, where it earned critical acclaim and received a special jury prize. The National Board of Review named it one of the 5 best documentaries of the year. Chris was also nominated for the Gotham Award for Best Documentary and for the Best Documentary Screenplay from the Writers Guild of America. Then Chris would continue to ride his superstardom trend by appearing in even more films. Paris. In 2010, he would appear in the black comedy Death at a Funeral, which was a parody of a British comedy movie with the same title. The film received mixed reviews, although Roger Ebert, critic of the Chicago Sun-Times, praised the film, writing, quote, "I laughed all the way through. In fact, this is the best comedy since The Hangover, and although it's almost a scene-by-scene remake of a 2007 British movie with the same title, it's funnier than the original," end quote. Another very popular film Chris would act in was Grown Ups, alongside his fellow former Saturday Night Live cast members Adam Sandler, David Spade, and Rob Schneider. This was an amazing family movie that was critically acclaimed and loved by comedy fans everywhere once again, and it would end up being one of the most popular movies Chris Rock had ever acted in. Then in 2011, Chris appeared on Broadway in Stephen Adly Guiar's play The Motherfucker with the Hat with Bobby Cannavale and Annabella Sciorra. He would do so well that he was nominated for a Drama League Award. In an interview with Vibe magazine, Chris stated that he chose to do Broadway because he wanted more people to see him, quote, really act. Sometimes when you do comedy, that can be a little formulaic and it's hard for really good directors to see that you can act, end quote. Then in August 2012, Chris went on to produce the series Totally Biased with W. Kamau Bell. While serving as producer, he had a production company, Chris Rock Enterprises. Then in 2012, Chris would star in the romantic comedy film What to Expect When You're Expecting, alongside Cameron Diaz, Jennifer Lopez, Anna Kendrick, and Elizabeth Banks. This movie was poorly received by critics, but despite that negativity, the film was still a massive financial success, and the cast yielded a huge profit. Chris would then earn a Teen Choice Award for Choice Movie Actor comedy nomination for his performance in the movie. He would continue to star in big-time movies, and next on the list was 2 Days in New York with Julie Delpy, which was a sequel to the previous movie titled 2 Days in Paris. The film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, where it received positive reviews, with critics praising the chemistry between the two, with Todd McCarthy of The Hollywood Reporter writing, quote, "The best of the humor is verbal and attitudinal, all delivered at a rapid clip in overlapping languages that Preston Sturges or Howard Hanks would have admired," end quote. Then in 2014, Chris Rock would once again act behind the camera for the movie Top 5 by scripting, writing, and directing the movie. The movie was designed to be a social commentary on the nature of fame and clout within American culture. A lot of critics saw this film and compared it to Woody Allen's 1980s movie titled Stardust Memories. The film premiered at the 2014 Toronto International Film Festival and received widespread critical acclaim. Scott Foundas, critic for Variety, praised the film, writing, quote, "Rock has finally found a big screen vehicle for himself that comes close to capturing the electric wit, shrewd social observations, and deeply autobiographical vein of his stand-up comedy," end quote. In Rolling Stone magazine, Peter Travers wrote in his review, quote, "Rock delivers the laughs, big ones, laced with razor-sharp observations on everything from pop culture to racial politics. His confident, prowling wit as a stand-up has finally found its way to the screen, enhanced by a bracing vulnerability. Top 5 is Rock's best movie by a mile," end quote. So even though directing is outside of Chris Rock's element as a comedian and actor, he would continue to pave his own path as a director on top of all his other creative outlets, and it proved incredibly successful for him. Then after this, Chris Rock would go on to host Saturday Night Live in 2014, where he absolutely brought the house down and proved once again that he is a formidable comedic force that has not lost his way or his ability to make people laugh with ease. Then the following year, in 2015, Saturday Night Live would have their 40th anniversary special on NBC, where Chris Rock would be in attendance. While at the ceremony, Chris would honor and then introduce his mentor, friend, and former Saturday Night Live cast member, Eddie Murphy. This moment had to have meant the world for Chris when you consider he started comedy at 19 years old, and within a few years of working hard at his dream, he was taken under the wing by his hero, and then he got to honor him at the 40th anniversary. Then later in 2015, Chris Rock would make an appearance as himself in A Very Murray Christmas, which was a musical Christmas special featuring Bill Murray. He sings the song Do You Hear What I Hear alongside Bill Murray, and this would go on to be a very successful project where Chris' performance was critically acclaimed. The film debuted on Netflix and received the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Television Movie. He would then collaborate with Adam Sandler once again in a Netflix film titled Sandy Wexler in 2017. Then he did it again in 2018 when he starred in the Netflix comedy The Week Of, which was directed by Robert Smigel. The film follows two fathers during the week of the wedding of their children. I watched this movie with my mom, and I'll put it this way. You should not watch this movie with your mom. Or by yourself, for that matter. You can't win them all, but it's all good. The following year, he briefly appeared in the comedy film Dolomite Is My Name in 2019, which starred Eddie Murphy. In the film, Eddie Murphy portrayed Rudy Ray Moore and centers around his career as a stand-up comedian and director of blaxploitation, starting with Dolomite in 1975. This movie premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. Chris Rock would also go on to direct and appear in some music videos. For example, he directed and appeared in the music video for the Red Hot Chili Peppers song Humpty Bump, and since then has appeared in several videos, including the Big Daddy Kane music video Smooth Operator as a guy getting his hair cut, one of the many celebrities seen lip-syncing in Johnny Cash's God's Gonna Cut You Down, a cameo in Madonna's Bitch I'm Madonna, and as a Wild West sheriff chasing down an 1889 cowboy version of Lil Nas X in Old Town Road. Then in October 2016, after over a decade of successful projects in film, comedy, and music, for Chris, Netflix announced that they would be releasing 2 comedy specials with Chris Rock and paying him $40 million per special. The first special was titled Chris Rock, Tambourine, and was released on February 14, 2018, after being filmed at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and was directed by comedian Bo Burnham. This marked the first comedy special Chris had done in over 10 years, and it was a massive success. Comedy fans and critics loved this special so much that Chris would end up being nominated for a Grammy Award for Best Comedy Album. Then in 2020, Chris Rock portrayed central character Loy Cannon in the 4th season of Fargo. And then in 2021, he starred in a reboot of the Saw franchise titled Spiral, which introduced him into the horror movie genre. There's really no other way to put it besides Chris Rock went from a successful comedian to one of the most famous comedians, actors, and directors on the planet. I didn't title this Chris Rock Superstardom for nothing, because in just about every single facet of the word, Chris Rock achieved success. Massive success. Quite literally everything he worked at came out very well and was critically acclaimed by comedy fans and critics alike. All in all, Chris Rock has done an amazing amount of work over his years working in the entertainment industry.
Throw your hands in the air if you's a true player.
It's impossible to talk about Chris Rock nowadays without this coming up. Before we dive into the slap, it's important to know that Chris Rock has hosted awards ceremonies for many years before this one. Chris Rock had seen some minor controversy over his career for the times when he hosted awards ceremonies, like in February 2005, when he hosted the 77th Academy Awards ceremony. Most of the time, the decision to have a comedian host the awards is seen as a chance to bring an edge to the ceremony and to make it more relevant or appealing to a younger demographic. During the ceremony, Chris Rock made a joke about Jude Law being a low-tier Tom Cruise, and that really pissed off director Sean Penn. Then Chris was also criticized for referring to the Oscars as idiotic and asserting that heterosexual men do not watch them in an interview prior to Oscar night. To me, that's pretty funny, but the Academy Award officials were pissed off at how Chris handled the entire situation, so given the history, the people who book hosts for these award shows know exactly how Chris Rock will conduct himself when he hosts an award show. You would think they would book him knowing full well what comes with him, but apparently not. Then on March 27, 2022, Chris Rock was hosting the 94th Academy Awards at the Dolby Theater located in Hollywood, California. Being a comedian, Chris Rock made sure to sprinkle jokes all throughout the awards ceremony, given the fact that this is what he was hired for. 2 of the attendants at this event were none other than Will Smith and his wife Jada Pinkett Smith. Luckily for Will, his wife's boyfriend allowed him to take her out to the Academy Awards that night. Jada Pinkett Smith had a shaved head, and this was because she had been shaving her head since 2021 when she started seeing symptoms of alopecia areata. Upon seeing Will Smith and his wife Baldywood, Chris Rock proceeded to make this joke.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right?
All things considered, this was a pretty tame joke. He could have done something like Anthony Jeselnik and made horrific cancer jokes that would have upset the entire audience and ruined the night, but he laid this one-liner on her that was genuinely innocuous. Then after he says this joke, Jada gives Will this stare like he needs to do something, so Will Smith proceeds to walk right up to Chris Rock and do this.
Uh-oh, Richard. Oh, wow. Wow.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
I'm going to, okay?
Despite getting hit by Will Smith that night, Chris Rock barely took a beating when you compare it to the beating that Jada's hoo-ha has taken from other men, if you know what I'm saying. Then after all of this, Will Smith won Best Actor, and in his acceptance speech, he apologized to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and other nominees, but not to Chris Rock. The next day, he issued an apology to Chris Rock through social media.
I will say to you, Chris, I apologize to you.
and Will Smith would proceed to reside his Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences membership on April 1st, facing a potential suspension or expulsion, and was banned from attending any of these related events for 10 years, effective on April 8th. All of this happened to Will Smith, but everyone wondered for a long time how Chris Rock felt about the situation after it happened, because in the moment of the slap, he didn't really give a formal response. It wasn't until he released his newest Netflix special entitled Chris Rock's Selective Outrage when he made it publicly known exactly how he felt about the entire situation. I will show a small amount of what Chris said to prevent any copyright claims, but I'll put it mildly. He brings the smoke to Jada and her wife Will Smith. Check it out.
It happened. I got smacked like a year ago. Last week, I got smacked in the fucking Oscars by this motherfucker. And people like, did it hurt? It still hurts. I got Summertime ringing in my ears. But I'm not a victim, baby. You will never see me on Oprah or Gayle crying. You will never see it. Never gonna happen. I couldn't believe it, and I love Men in Black. No. I know you can't tell on camera. Will Smith is significantly bigger than me. We are not the same size, okay? We are not. This guy, Will Smith does movies with his shirt off. You've never seen me do a movie with my shirt off. If I'm in a movie getting open heart surgery, I got on a sweater. For people that don't know, what everybody know, his wife was fucking her son's friend, okay? Now, I normally would not talk about this shit, but for some reason, these put that shit on the internet. I have no idea why two talented people would do something that fucking low down. What the fuck? We all been cheated on. Everybody in here been cheated on. None of us have ever been interviewed by the person that cheated on us on television.
This was the only thing we heard from Chris Rock about the slap, and for most comedy fans, this was more than enough content to warrant what they felt was an appropriate response given the situation. Then Will Smith came out and said that he believes that Chris Rock's comments about him and Jada within the special were below the belt, and that he wants Chris to let it go and move on. This was hilarious to hear from Will when you consider that once again, Chris is a comedian who gets paid millions of dollars to tell jokes, and Will physically attacked him. He recorded the special and roasted Will Smith and his dying marriage to a crisp, and honestly, he didn't even say anything petty. He simply stated facts, and Will cried about it. I mean, as cliche as it is to say, if you can't take it, then don't dish it out. Chris got bullied nonstop as a kid. I'm sure the last thing he wanted to happen from this was Will getting harassed and bullied nonstop for this, for all of eternity, but he can't control the internet. Anyway, this was an incredibly popular incident that included Chris Rock, and I'd say he handled it as well as he possibly could have given the circumstances. You got a gun up in your waist, please don't shoot up the place. Currently, Chris Rock has 7 comedy specials available to be viewed. Chris Rock has so many brilliant specials, but what is noteworthy to me is the fact that he doesn't have quite as many comedy specials as someone like George Carlin, for example, and that he does not release a new special every single year. However, I think part of the reason all of Chris Rock's specials were so good is because he actually took several years to work and hone each individual special in comedy clubs and on tour before he recorded them as specials and released them to the public. Some comedians have discussed how they find it incredibly difficult to follow the common format, that is, to record a new special every single year and make it super tight, the way that somebody like Louis C.K., Richard Pryor, or George Carlin does. So Chris Rock's method of taking a few years before releasing a new special may be a very safe alternative to the common old school method comedians talk about, which is writing a new hour of comedy every single year. It also probably works well for someone like Chris when you consider he's also a very busy actor and director, so stand-up comedy is not his sole focus anymore like it once was. This is not to say one method is better than the other, rather that different strategies work for different artists. However, as stated previously, Chris Rock has released some of the best comedy specials we've ever seen. His specials include Big Ass Jokes, Bring the Pain, Bigger and Blacker, Never Scared, Kill the Messenger, Tambourine, and Selective Outrage. His first 5 specials are located on HBO, but Tambourine and Selective Outrage can be found on Netflix. Out of all these comedy specials, my 2 favorites are Tambourine and Bring the Pain. To begin with, I'll talk about Tambourine. The special opened up with Chris Rock talking about police brutality and going right for the throat, and then he naturally segues into jokes about relationships, parenting, and society. We also get to take a look into Chris's personal life as he discusses how his marriage ended, the divorce process, cheating on his wife, and then finally the struggles of dating again after being married for so long. Chris Rock is known for his edgy and socially conscious comedy, and Tambourine is certainly not an exception to this, as Chris shares his perspectives on contemporary issues while injecting humor into his observations the way he has done for so many years already. All in all, if you're a fan of anything comedy, I'd highly recommend checking out Tambourine by Chris Rock. Finally, my favorite special by Chris Rock is Bring the Pain. This special came at a very unique time for Chris because he said he had been feeling the pressure in his career and like it was on a downtrend overall. So he wanted to make something really special for himself and for his fans in comedy. The special is widely regarded as one of the most iconic and influential comedy performances of its time. In this special, Chris Rock addresses a variety of topics including race, relationships, and society, as he usually does, and he is particularly known for the sharp and incisive commentary on racial issues, often challenging societal norms and racial stereotypes. The special covers a range of themes, from the dynamic of relationships to the brutal reality of being black in the United States. One of my favorite bits from this special is when he talks about men and women and who he thinks lies more often. Check it out.
And who's the biggest liars, men or women? Men, we lie all the time. We lie so much it's damn near language. To call a man out for lying is like playing basketball with a retarded kid and calling him for double dribble. That's a man's lie. A woman's lie is like, it's your baby. You got on heels, you ain't that tall. You got on makeup, your face don't look like that.
This is a hilarious bit where Chris absolutely nails the difference between men and women and why they both lie in relationships and how they do it differently. The other bit I will share is when he talks about gun control. Check it out.
You don't need no gun control. You know what you need? We need some bullet control. We need to control the bullet. Every time somebody gets shot, you be like, damn, he must have did something. They put $50,000 worth of bullets in his ass.
This is another hilarious bit from the special that I absolutely loved. And then you could check out Nachos versus Black People. This is another crazy bit, and it was actually incredibly controversial, but it is part of the reason that this special got so popular. All in all, I could share more of my favorite bits from this special, but if I did, we'd be here all day. I conclude this segment by saying what we already know. Chris Rock is a comedic genius, and it's no secret why every special he has released over the decades of him performing stand-up comedy has gotten bigger and bigger and better. These were the stand-up comedy specials of Chris Rock.
Throw your hands in the air if you's a true player.
Chris Rock's impact on stand-up comedy cannot be overstated. Chris has always been able to talk openly about the aspects of his life and the world around us that he finds intriguing, and that is an admirable skill for a comedian to have. Many comedians have cited Chris Rock as a contemporary and a hero of theirs, including Dave Chappelle, Kevin Hart, Mark Normand, and Michael Che. It seems that in his years of performing stand-up comedy non-stop, and even dipping his toes into the world of acting and directing, it's just impossible to deny how influential Chris Rock has become over the decades he has been creating art. I understand some of you may disagree with the title, but I simply named the documentary this way because I saw Dave Chappelle live recently, and I was quoting him because in the stand-up set that Dave Chappelle did, he called Chris Rock the greatest comedian who is currently living. Hence, I decided to make that the title of this video. So if you have a problem with the title, you can take it up with Dave Chappelle. It takes a lot of courage to take the journey that Chris Rock has taken. He started off as a young, skinny kid from South Carolina, and he moved to Brooklyn, New York with his family and was ruthlessly bullied by students at his own high school. Then after years of abuse and hardship, Chris decided to drop out and do his own thing as a comedian, and he very quickly rose from a regular comedian to one of the biggest stars to ever take the stage. Now he is an undeniable force of dominance in the world of comedy, and he graces the stage anywhere he decides to perform. This has been Chris Rock, the greatest living comedian. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching the Chris Rock documentary all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Chris Rock is an awesome comedian. He's definitely in my top 10. And I think he's got some of the best comedy specials out right now, so it was a privilege to make this little documentary about him. And I hope you guys loved it. If you'd like to support my channel, make sure you guys leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because that's a free way for you to help this community grow and to help make sure that this video gets out to as many people as possible. Maybe even share it with somebody you think would like it. And if you hated the video, share it with somebody that you don't like. And if you guys want to take the support for the channel to the next level, you can check out my Patreon page here, where you get to see exclusive content and updates, like here's a tape of me performing at the Tampa Improv. You also get shout outs in every video, and you get to see videos before they're publicly released on the YouTube channel. Additionally, you get to play a direct hand in the direction that my channel takes in terms of content. Real quick shout out to Crossblocker, Jay Murray, and Thomas Gill for supporting my Patreon and helping me towards my goal of becoming financially independent. Once again, hope you guys love the video. Anyway, guys, just want to remind you to take care of yourselves, your friends, your family, or any of your loved ones. I love you, and I'll see you in the next documentary. See ya.
The only country that really worries me is the country of Germany. I don't know if you guys are history buffs or not, but...
How does Norm Macdonald tell a joke? When it comes to telling jokes, there are very few comedians who are at the caliber of Norm Macdonald. It seems like when you watch him tell a story, it very quickly turns into pure chaos. But in that chaos, a tremendous amount of humor and laughter can be found.
Hey, let me ask you this. Did you ever toss a prostitute off a bridge?
What Norm does may seem like a mystery to you, but Mark Twain details exactly what he does in the book How to Tell a Story in Others, and we will get into that in just a second. You could be watching him tell a simple one-liner joke about a moth entering a podiatrist's office. You may even know the punchline for this joke in particular, but the way Norm diverts away from the ending of the joke to give us a therapy session from the moth's perspective makes you completely forget that he's telling you a joke. He begins sharing how the moth is working a dead-end job for a terrible boss in a loveless marriage, and how his children are very sick. And by this point, he's gone so far off the deep end, you've completely forgotten about where the joke is supposed to go because of your investment in the moth's struggles. Throughout the story, every nook and cranny, Norm makes you laugh over and over again, and he hasn't even delivered the punchline yet. Then eventually, after you've eaten out of the palm of his hand for enough time, Norm throws away the punchline in a fashion where you feel like an idiot for not expecting it. How on earth did Norm pull this off so effortlessly any time he appeared on late night television? First of all, Norm Macdonald has been doing stand-up comedy for well over a decade, in some of these clips over 2 decades, so by the nature of repetition, Norm had mastered the art of his comedic delivery and his ability to tell a humorous story long before a lot of his most popular clips you've even seen on late night TV. Along with that, Norm was an avid reader who greatly appreciated the works of writers like Leo Tolstoy and Mark Twain. Mark Twain actually wrote a short novel called How to Tell a Story in Others. This is what I will be using today to help illustrate exactly how Norm Macdonald tells a joke on late night TV. When you open the book, in paragraph 2, Mark Twain says, "There are several kinds of stories, but only one difficult kind, the humorous. I will talk mainly about that one. The humorous story is American, the comic story is English, the witty story is French. The humorous story depends for its effect upon the manner of the telling, the comic story and the witty story upon the matter." Then in paragraph 3 it reads, "The humorous story may be spun out to great length and may wander around as much as it pleases and arrive nowhere in particular, but the comic and witty stories must be brief and end with a point. The humorous story bubbles gently along, the others burst." When you read this, what do you immediately think of? It almost feels like Mark Twain wrote this right after watching a Norm Macdonald joke on Conan's late night show. It emphasizes that the destination in the humorous story is not of any real significance, and that the constant setting and breaking of expectations is what makes it incredibly special and entertaining for the listeners. However, the comic story that you typically hear from friends or family members is essentially just one big build-up for an often mediocre or unsatisfying ending. Anyone can tell the comic story, but it takes a lot of practice and patience to tell the humorous story. This type of story resembles anti-humor in the capacity that the ending is sometimes anticlimactic, but I think the biggest distinction is that anti-humor is a joke told with the intention of its unfunniness being humorous, but the humorous story is mainly told while the artist just ensures that the journey is enjoyable with less of an emphasis on the ending of the joke. Mark Twain even says in the next paragraph when he writes, "The humorous story is strictly a work of art, high and delicate art, and only an artist can tell it. This is why I preface this analysis by telling you how Norm had been doing stand-up for decades before we ever heard the moth joke or heard him call his wife a battle axe. To tell any of these jokes the way Norm tells them takes many hours and many years of hard work and repetition. Mark Twain is not exaggerating when he says it is a high and delicate art that can only be told by an artist who has mastered the ability of comedic delivery and storytelling. Twain details the difference between the humorous story and comic story even more so in the next paragraph when he writes, "The humorous story is told gravely. The teller does his best to conceal the fact that he even dimly suspects that there is anything funny about it. But the teller of the comic story tells you beforehand that it is one of the funniest things he has ever heard, then tells it with eager delight and is the first person to laugh when he gets through, and sometimes if he has had good success, he is so glad and happy that he will repeat the nub of it and glance around from face to face, collecting applause, and then repeat it again. It is a pathetic thing to see." This is the difference between a joke that Norm Macdonald tells and a joke that your dad tells at a Thanksgiving dinner. When I first read this paragraph, I immediately thought of the most convoluted joke ever that Norm does on the Conan O'Brien show.
Went by the name of Jacques de Gautier. While I was scrambling to get out of high school, Jacques Zagatino had already...
I think he just changed his last name.
Well, you know, a man grows.
He pretends there's absolutely nothing funny about the line, "a man grows," when he delivers it so subtly. This is an incredibly funny subversion, but Norm says it as if he has no idea it's about to crack the entire room up, and that's part of the beauty that Mark Twain articulates for the humorous story. Very often, of course, the rambling and disjointed humorous story finishes with a nub, point, snapper, or whatever you like to call it. Then the listener must be alert, for in many cases the teller will divert attention from the nub by dropping it in a carefully casual and indifferent way, with the pretense that he doesn't know it is a nub. Another fascinating thing about Norm's delivery is when he fools you into thinking a story or joke is done, and you quickly realize after you laugh that you're still in the setup of the joke, and that you're just trying to pay attention and see where he's going to take you next. Mark Twain also detailed someone named Artemus Ward, who commonly used this trick when he was telling a humorous story, where he would deliver a joke, and when the audience took a second to catch and they started to laugh, he looked up with this innocent surprise on his face, as if he didn't just say something hilarious. Another important part that Mark Twain highlights about the humorous story is the pause. Mark Twain says, "The pause is an exceedingly important feature in any kind of story, and a frequently recurring feature too. It is a dainty thing, and delicate and also uncertain and treacherous, for it must be exactly the right length, no more and no less, or it fails of its purpose and makes trouble. If the pause is too short, the impressive point is past, and if too long, the audience have had time to divine that a surprise is intended, and then you can't surprise them, of course." Another thing Norm is a master at is exactly that in his comedic timing, and he uses the pause as much as he can to make a funny story even funnier, as mentioned by Mark Twain in How to Tell a Story in Others. Now, I have no evidence that Norm Macdonald read this story by Mark Twain and used it as his blueprint for late-night television appearances, but I do know that Norm Macdonald was an avid reader of Mark Twain's literature and has a deep appreciation for his work. I can confidently state, though, that this short novel by Mark Twain describes in great detail what Norm Macdonald is well known for in his late-night appearances, because the format is extremely similar. I'm going to show you each of the elements we covered from the novel in a joke Norm tells on Conan titled, "Norm Macdonald Tells the Most Convoluted Joke Ever."
Jacques de Gautier. Jacques Zagatino.
I think he just changed his last name.
Well, you know, a man grows.
As I mentioned earlier, Norm setting up Jacques de Gautier's name twice and then saying it wrong as Jacques de Goutina the third time just to slide in a silly joke sets up a sequence of expectations that are then shattered by Norm, leading to a huge laugh from the audience and Conan. Specifically, Mark Twain says, "To string incongruities and absurdities together in a wandering and sometimes purposeless way and seem innocently unaware that they are absurdities is the basis of the American art, if my position is correct." And Norm does this right here perfectly. The next part that stands out to me is when Norm Macdonald tells Conan about SeaWorld as if nobody in the world has ever heard of it.
SeaWorld there. You know how they have the SeaWorld? You know, with the different fish. You know.
I didn't know that, but okay. Yeah. Yes.
Beluga.
The SeaWorld. I've been
Sure.
there many a time.
Okay, so
Conan plays along with it, and in the meantime, the crowd is eating this part up because Norm plays it off so well that he's sincerely talking about it as if nobody knows what SeaWorld is.
So I was checking out the beluga whales and stuff, and I look over, and who do you think I see?
I hope it's that guy.
No, it was just an attendant, but...
And in the next clip here, Norm sets us up to think he's seeing Jacques de Gatineau at SeaWorld, and when Norm asks the question to set up the pause, Conan applies pressure to the pause and makes it even more powerful. Then right as the crowd quiets down, Norm delivers that it's not Jacques de Gatineau with perfect timing, and it causes the crowd and Conan to burst into laughter once again. Then after Norm has warmed us up, he delivers the final punchline where Jacques de Gatineau is feeding baby dolphins and says to him, "I'm serving a youthful porpoise."
So he was feeding these baby dolphins, you know, and I said, "I'm ashamed of you, Jacques de Gatineau." He said, "I think I'm serving a youthful porpoise." Now, I believe that...
If there were no incongruities and absurdities in the story, this would have certainly been the shittiest comic story ever. But because Norm understands that the journey in the story is more important than the destination, he's able to deliver this corny-ass punchline and get a big laugh from it. Norm made the entire story funny and interesting to listen to, so as a result, the ending, being anticlimactic, doesn't really hurt the joke at all because it's not the landing point. When you understand the chasm of difference between a generic comic story and a beautifully delivered humorous story, you come to appreciate Norm's ability to pleasantly waste your time even more so than before. This is why Norm is held at such a high regard in his late-night appearances. This is why Conan speaks so highly of what Norm did in telling these fake stories and wasting everybody's time so highly. Telling a joke like this takes years and years of hard work, and it cannot be learned overnight unless you are simply gifted beyond measures. All in all, this is how Norm Macdonald tells a joke. Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching to the end. A quick reminder that the best way that you can help this channel for 100% free is by subscribing down below so that you can see more content when it comes out in the future. I believe 99% of the people who watched my last video on Norm Macdonald were not subscribed to the channel, so let's go ahead and fix that. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. Take care of yourselves, God bless, and I'll see you in the next one.